Global, national, and local food production systems face pressures from both long-term trends, such as climate change and an increasing population, and unexpected events with outsized impacts, such as COVID-19. At the global level, food production systems will be required to cope with an expected increase in the global population to 9 billion by 2050. At the national level, COVID-19 related supply chain disruptions have thrown into sharp relief the need for at least some degree of food self-sufficiency in Singapore. As we confront these challenges at the national and global levels, how do we produce enough food in sustainable ways? In what ways can deep science and technology in agri-food innovation play in this endeavor? My name is Benny, Assistant Director of Venture Investing at SG Innovate, and I'm the pleasure of welcoming two food science industry veterans to join me on this episode of the Digital Feed as we discuss understanding food science and sustainability. Dr. Hazel, Michael, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I won't be able to do justice in making the introductions on your behalf, so I'll ask that you introduce yourselves to our audience. Perhaps we can start with Dr. Hazel, please.
Well, first of all, thank you, Benny, for inviting me to this dialogue session. So my name is Hazel Khoo. I spent a number of years working in Nestle R&D following my graduate studies. One wonderful few years in Nestle, mostly in Singapore, but also with a number of overseas stints, including bringing a product that had been developed right into industrialization in one of the Nestle factories in China. So following that wonderful few years in Nestle, I joined A-Star and have been rotating in a number of portfolios within A-Star, and now in my current new role as the Executive Director of the Singapore Institute of Food and Biotechnology Innovation.
Wonderful. It's a good mix of government and business, and I understand Michael also has an interesting story to share about your background.
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for the invitation, and hi, Hazel. My name is Michael Patane. I have worked in the food and pharmaceutical industry for about 40 years, so I'm generally on the older side of life. The fortunate part about that is being able to be involved in a variety of innovations over the years, and have spent most of that time working with organizations to bring good science to market, looking at what customers, governments, and communities need, and trying to fulfill that need on the basis of being able to bring better health and better immunity, especially in times like now. So my background is in medical science, and my PhD was in clinical biochem, so it's trying to bring science and commercialization together.
It's also a very nice fit for today's topic around food science and sustainability, but it's also very, very broad. So maybe if we can try and break it down. McGill University, for example, defines food science as a multidisciplinary field. It involves chemistry, biochemistry, nutrition, microbiology, and engineering to give one, the scientific knowledge to solve real problems associated with the many facets of the food system. So that's a huge mouthful. Let's try and break this down into its component parts. From your perspectives, what have been, some of the problems that food science has helped to solve over the years? Maybe Dr. Hazel, we can start with you.
So Benny, I'm glad that you raised this point at the start of this session. What you just described, food actually requires a multidisciplinary approach. And food actually is a very complex matrix, right? You talk about disciplines of chemistry, the physical science, the microbiology, the food science, nutrition as well. So the question is about some examples for which food science have solved in terms of the problems. So we look at some of the historical problems that food science has aimed to solve. One could look at the milk and dehydrating milk into milk powder through spray drying. So that's one problem that technology has aimed to solve. And it is really about extending the shelf life of milk so that it can be distributed more easily. Second example is canning of food products. Again, it is about shelf life extension, and it is then about enabling us to stockpile and, again, ease of distribution. And we look at another set of food products that we are very familiar with, say bread, beer. I'm sure Mike loves this a lot. Yogurt, chocolate. So these are all using a very natural food processing method called fermentation. And what this very traditional food processing method of fermentation aims to deliver is to give us a variety of food products with different qualities, offering different food qualities, properties, flavors, taste, as well as the other organoleptic properties. So what I'm trying to say is that we are using a myriad of multidisciplinary expertise to deliver a wide range of products that consumers would be interested to consume. But if you look at more present-day problems, we talk about the world population hitting to 9 billion in the year 2050. There will be issues of producing sufficient food, sufficient nutrition to feed the world. And now, with complemented by the climate change, food wastage. So again, these are problems that the food ecosystem have to address now. And I just want to leave one final point, because you mentioned nutrition as another discipline that we ought to pay attention to. If you look at food, food is something that we consume in a relatively large quantities. It goes into our food system, it gets digested, it gets assimilated. So if one can really look at the food that enters into our system and gives us the nutrients besides the energy, and if we just open our aperture, we can actually open up also a new paradigm of looking at food as a new medicine. So while it is not a problem, I don't intend to position it as a problem to solve, but it is an opportunity that's really worth exploring.
Very comprehensive answer, with a lot of talking points and things to think about. So I don't envy your position, Michael, in following up on that answer.
Hazel has an enormous amount of experience, but I'll try my best. Penny, one of the things that we also need to include in the realm of food science is an understanding of what consumer perception is, what the market is looking for, what governments are helping to promote to ensure we stay healthy and safe. As well as chemistry and biochemistry, I'd also include sensory analysis and marketing analysis. It gives an idea of what consumer preference are. It gives industry an understanding of how to satisfy market needs. Being in Singapore, 90% of everything that's consumed in the country is imported in. One of the most amazing discoveries in the last 20 to 30 years has been the ability to transport fresh fruit and vegetables around the world seasonally. So that if you look at being able to go to a supermarket here in Singapore and you'll see cherries from the US, you'll see blueberries from Argentina. These are short shelf life products. The ability to be able to bring them into the country under modified atmospheric conditions, under storage conditions which provide for good respiration, good temperature control, means that we can have nutritious food year-round from different parts of the world. One of the other initiatives, which has been incredibly interesting, is being the fortification of staple foods so that mass populations don't have to suffer malnutrition. Being able to fortify flour, rice, bread, as Hazel said, provides sustenance. Another example of how that occurred, and this is going back into the olden times, probably at the birth of where gut microbiome research began. People like white bread, for example, but everyone is aware that if you have lots more fiber in your diet, it's better for your gut health. There was a series of companies back in the late 80s, early 90s, that developed a series of resistant starch products. So these act as fiber. So a company in Australia called Goodman Fielder back in the 90s launched a bread called Wonder White, which was white bread that had 6 grams of fiber in it. So it could claim on pack it was high in dietary fiber. So food science was able to take the wants and needs of consumers to make white bread and the science to cultivate crops to produce fiber that was white. So it made a perfect marriage.
Superb points that you mentioned and great examples as well. I think, shifting gears a little bit, because you also mentioned, aside from problems that have been solved, potential areas for looking at. So if you could help us also understand what are some emerging technologies that you're excited about, and what kinds of problems are they solving that can perhaps help you sleep a lot better at night. Maybe we start with Michael this time so we can put Dr. Hazel on the spot for a bit later on.
Okay. The things that keep me awake at night, particularly in these times during COVID, how do we make sure that our friends, family, and the community are safe? How do you ensure that you develop your body so that it builds up an innate immunity? Part of that happens through supplementation and eating well, exercise. One of the things that DSM does is through clinical research, develop a range of supplements, including vitamins, minerals. Strangely, that not a lot of people know is that DSM is one of the world's largest supplier of omega-3 oils. So the combinations of products like this that improve your gut microbiome, that improve your cognitive recognition, eye health, all assist to be able to provide a healthier environment. So one of the things that I would always strive for is to make sure that I and everyone around me is healthy and safe.
Thank you. And Dr. Hazel?
Yeah, so earlier on, we talked about some of the challenges that the food system is facing today globally. The expansion of the world population, climate change, how do we produce food more sustainably? So these are actually the aims of what the institute I'm leading is also trying to address. So if you look at our capabilities, we are a fairly new institute. We have capabilities that is actually quite a unique marriage of biotechnology, food process engineering, as well as clinical nutrition. And by bringing all these capabilities together, as what you say, we need a multidisciplinary approach. So this is what keeps me awake at night, because we are a new institute. How do we combine all this multidisciplinary expertise that we have to address these complex problems? And these problems are multifaceted. It is not just one particular discipline can address. The aims of the institute is to contribute to this sustainable effort, also to contribute to the Singapore Food Story 30 by 30 national goal. And the institute has a vision of being a global leader, driving excellence in food and biotech. And these are the things that really keep my mind active at night. How do we deliver on this? How do we contribute to the national agenda? And the outcomes that we aim to achieve are on 3 levels: economic outcomes, food security, as well as how food can create a positive health impact, like what Mike has just said. And also because we are a fairly new research institute in A*, how do we actually be ahead of the curve? Right? I mentioned earlier that food is actually a complex food matrix. We have to look at food as a total food ecosystem rather than its individual parts. So these are things that require a very multidisciplinary perspective so that we can deliver food as a total solution, not just safe food, food that is pleasurable to eat, but also the nutrients.
Okay, it's a great point about being able to be part of a food ecosystem and treating the problems as an ecosystem. Just to stick with SIFBI for a minute, just to see how SIFBI fits within the ecosystem. So you spoke about the bringing together multidisciplinary capabilities to achieve the 3 levels of objectives you talked about. In each of these objectives that you're looking at, could you also share what are some of the things that you're doing to try and achieve them, if it could be broken down into the 3 levels, or and to identify what it is that SIFBI is focusing on at this point in time?
Right. So it's a quite wide range of things. So if we leverage on our biotechnology capabilities as well as our metabolic engineering capabilities, we'll be looking at identifying unique microorganisms. And we've got a rich natural product library within SIFBI, for which we can mine for interesting producers of compounds. It might be an alternative protein. It might be other bioactives that deliver unique functional properties, say a gelling agent or a flavor or a tastant. So how do we actually identify or select unique microorganisms from our collection and then use engineering tools, metabolic engineering tools, to design this microorganism into a high-producing cellular factory. And then we use biotransformation or fermentation, if you put it in a simpler term, so that we can grow up these microorganisms to produce the desired compound in very large quantities. And these are using very controlled processing conditions. And here, then, we talk about, climate change that will be, gradually eroding the natural resources that we have. The arable land is depleting. But when we use technologies, advanced technologies, controlled advanced technologies, we are actually breaking away from these limitations. And so this is just an example within SIFBI, how we can bring a wide spectrum of our capabilities to address some of these problems.
Okay. So thank you for sharing some of these examples. I think when we look at the new technologies as well, there's great potential for each of these technologies to help advance certain causes within food science and sustainability and nutrition as well. But there's also the flip side, and there are risks involved in certain technologies. In evaluating new technologies, how do we think about some of these risks? Maybe we can start from a business perspective. If Michael, you could offer your perspective on how do we think about risks when looking at new technologies and food science?
I think we have to mitigate risk, or at least plan a strategy forward in everything we do, whether it be simple business development or whether it be long-term inspirational science. I'm looking forward to working with Hazel and the team at SIFBI after hearing what she just said a lot more. One of the things that DSM does as an organization, we will listen to what industry and the greater community is looking for, and then we'll plan a way forward to mitigate the risk. If I use COVID as an example and the development of vaccine technology in a record period of time, the ability to be able to bring something to market that quickly relies on bringing a whole number of organizations together in unison. Government, regulatory institution, medical science, research institutions like SIFBI. Being able to coordinate this helps to mitigate risk. Being able to plan ahead and understand what the end goal is and where we are now, and how do we navigate our way through so that we mitigate any risk, and then have that message transferred to the general public so that they feel safe, feel conscious, feel willing to absorb these. One of the things that DSM did recently was put out a vitamin D supplement, which is absorbed into the body much faster. And we'll call it the sunshine vitamin, for want of a better term. But vitamin D3, or cholecalciferol, helps with an immune response. It helps with muscles, with joints, with brain recognition. So being able to listen to what's happening around us, be able to plan a way forward and mitigate risks by looking at them early, helps bring product to market safely that people feel comfortable to use.
Thank you, Michael. Great points. Some of them I will try and revisit later on, but Hazel, what's your take as well?
On the risk aspect, I just want to underscore one of the points that Mike has just raised, which is on safety. So food is not food unless it is safe. So that is of paramount consideration, and a risk that we have to consider right at onset of when we are developing a food product or a food process. From a food innovator's point of view, the other risks or considerations to consider would be the sustainable and steady supply of the inputs or the feedstock, and also the process parameters itself. Are they sustainable? Are they reproducible? And how do we upscale the production? And then eventually, when the product is produced, what is the industry uptake? What is the consumer acceptance? Mike also mentioned about the regulatory framework. And also, consumer is actually a very important part of the ecosystem. And we mustn't forget that we need to engage the consumers, in fact, right at the onset, rather than waiting too late into the food innovation journey.
Great points. Actually, both of your points lead me into my next question around consumer engagement. So around food innovation. We had a whole ruckus around GMO foods in the late 90s and early 2000s. And there was this huge debate about the kinds of risk around that and how we should be thinking about it from a regulatory perspective and other aspects. And both of you also spoke about trying to engage consumers early. What kind of lessons can we draw from something like that, and how do we engage consumers early enough without spooking them, but giving them full information as to what these innovations relate to? Maybe Michael, you can start.
Okay. Again, using COVID as an example, the world realized that a pandemic had hit the planet. The recognition by people all over the world wanted to say, how do we get through this? One of the ways to help people get through situations is to keep them informed. Bring them close. Let them know that we're here to help you. We're here to care. We're here to make a difference. So being able to earn and justify that confidence in consumers means that you have to prove that it's safe, as Hazel said. You have to do clinical trials. You have to ensure that when you make something, you make it right first time, every time, reproducibly. So I like your points about making sure that food is safe and reproducible, because it's one of those things that we consume every day in addition to any other nutritious substance or medication that we take. So being able, in the sense of food, to be able to make food safe from farm to fork, so that you're able to work on being able to provide agricultural feedstocks for animals, for crops, being able to make sure that the GMO issues are not a concern, being able to ensure that you're utilizing the planet's resources sustainably so that we're not creating barren land, being able to ensure that we have a supply of food that's not just nutritious and safe, but is there in abundance and recyclable. And I use the word recyclable in a way of saying sustainable. So I was talking to you earlier about some innovations that are happening in Singapore at the moment with both plant-based and cell-based technologies as here in Singapore, to cultivate cells to grow chicken meat, to look at being able to take spent resources from the palm oil industry, from the chicken industry, from sugarcane industry, to produce valuable resources such as fiber. If we say that companies like Wilmar or Golden Agri, who produce these products, are able to take their spent resources, turn them into fiber, and use these wonderful antioxidants that are inside called polyphenols. These help to reduce the number of bad bacteria in your gut, while also help the good bacteria grow and produce what's called short-chain fatty acids that will help your gut lining absorb nutrients and continue to grow. So being able to use resources more extensively increases the sustainability on the planet and reduces the effect of greenhouse gases. One of the things that DSM also does is try to incorporate these ingredients plus a range of enzymes which help digestibility in animals, so that we don't produce as many greenhouse gases as a function of agriculture and growing foods. So I think it's a combined initiative that governments, manufacturers, research institutions should combine their resources together and produce something that's more sustainable for the long-term benefit.
Thank you, Michael. And you made a great point also about what we discussed before the recording. It's probably we have all these interesting discussions even outside the recording, and perhaps we need to find a way to see how we can squeeze that into our sharing as well. Dr. Hazel.
Yeah, so earlier we talked about engaging the public at the onset. So Mike also talking about having that closeness with the consumers. We need to bring scientific evidence, data, to demystify novel foods, particularly for novel foods. Maybe look at, say, some of the microbial-based alternative proteins. We're talking about using a very traditional process like fermentation. And that's the reason why I raised earlier some of the foods that we're very familiar with. They are produced through fermentation. So we can bring this scientific evidence as well of how food products are developed that can deliver the right nutrients and to deliver that bioavailability when the food is being consumed, I think that helps the consumers better understand the food products that manufacturers are pushing out to the market. Just coming back to novel foods again, because of that government move, the 30 by 30 national goal, in 2019, the Singapore government rolled out the Singapore Food Story. And under this umbrella, there's a thrust on looking at future food safety science. And just a few months ago, a tripartite platform was launched called the Future Ready Food Safety Hub. And it is a tripartite arrangement that includes A*STAR, NTU, as well as SFA. So this is really creating a platform through a public-private partnership to look at future food safety requirements and needs. We talked about sensory science, right? Because food must taste good before consumers would pay a price to buy it. So we need to do these sensory studies early at the onset so that we can iterate the product, we can refine the product to make it better and more acceptable and more likable by the consumers. Just to draw an example from SIFBI, we recently developed a low GI biscuit, a low GI cookie, a premix that we are now partnering with an industry partner, Nutrients, which is also a spin-off and a co-venture from A*STAR. And what we've done is that it is currently in a pre-market launch. We introduced it into the National Day Fun Pack, right? We just had our National Day so-called ceremonial celebration over the weekend. And we're gathering consumer feedback, right? So that they can let us know how they feel about the cookie that we've developed. And it's a low GI cookie. And through that process of early consumer engagement, sensory science, getting feedback from the consumers, we can better refine the product.
Great points, great points. And I remember the hub's name as FRESH. We are great with acronyms, so it's a great acronym as well. So we've talked at some length about early consumer engagement and presenting evidence-based information to help consumers with acceptance and adoption. But aside from that, what other factors or conditions would be required to have a thriving food science ecosystem in Singapore? We revisit the whole ecosystem point as well. In Singapore, how do we build that? Maybe Michael?
Benny, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to tell you about a DSM initiative called the Bright Science Hub. And it is exactly as you've just described an ecosystem. And we're hoping to work together with Hazel and the team at SIFBI also with this. It's designed to bring bright minds and bright innovation together at the one site. It's providing both working spaces and laboratories where people can take proof of concept and develop it to be market ready. One of the things that most startup companies lack, they have fantastic science, they have wonderful inspiration, dedication to be able to solve the problems of the world. Having been an entrepreneur that had done that many years ago, the one thing that I lacked was the ability to understand the entire business scope, being able to make financial projections, business strategy, understand the size of the market, financial returns. One of the things that the Bright Science Hub is set up to do is to combine local and regional companies with venture capitalists, with government institutions. We work with organizations such as Hazel mentioned, the Singapore Food Authority, and we work with Enterprise Singapore, the Economic Development Board, and IPI as a primary example. With IPI, for example, we've reviewed 35 different technologies, and out of those we have NDAs with 10 companies and a series of MOUs where we'll bring product together to the market. So it's developing this ecosystem where you look at great ideas, how do you help companies get them to market? And an example is being an institution that helps university startup companies come into the Bright Science Hub, do the development, speak to our marketing people, our sales people, our manufacturing operations people about how do you take a good idea, take it to proof of concept, go then and work with Hazel's team at SIFBI to scale it up in pilot plant and then work with the venture firms to be able to develop either green or brownfield sites that will take these products to market with an understanding of what geographical countries you want to launch this in, what demographics you want to launch it in, what market niches are available. So to be able to tailor a product to the market will always help mitigate its possibility for not going well and enhance its chances for success.
Well, thanks for sharing about that. So it's exciting and interesting to know that we've got ecosystem partnerships both with Fresh and with Bright Science Hub. So it's really good news for the ecosystem as well. And Dr. Hazel, I'm sure you also have examples to share.
Yeah, I just want to expand further on what Mike has just said. I mean, the ecosystem is just a very important, the whole food innovation value chain. Particularly for the food sector, the food industry, there's just so many stakeholders. And Mike, I think you have just covered it so comprehensively. As a research institute under A*STAR, we welcome companies to work with us. So that is a public-private partnership. Mike spoke about Bright Science Hub, and I think that's also aiming to catalyze private-private partnership. So the whole ecosystem has to be one that creates that dynamism of partnerships at all levels. And the other so-called key ingredients to have a thriving food innovation ecosystem in Singapore is about the shared facility, bringing food innovation all the way from the lab to pilot scale and all the way to production scale and go to market. We see that there is currently a gap in some parts of the pilot scale facility. And this is something that we are working with various stakeholders to plug the gap. Government support is also important. As I mentioned earlier, in 2019, the Singapore government launched the Singapore Food Story, injecting $144 million to support this agenda. A robust food regulatory framework as well as standards is also very key to this endeavor. And previously, we just talked about engaging consumers early. So that is also an important aspect that we have to consider.
Okay, great points. We've covered a number of different factors that we would need for a strong ecosystem. Openness to innovation, for example, through partnerships. We've talked about regulatory frameworks being robust, early engagements with consumers. And Dr. Hazel, you mentioned a point actually that would segue into my next question, which was certain areas in which the Singapore ecosystem can improve. So you spoke about, maybe we need more pilot facilities in Singapore. Are there any other types of challenges that we would need to overcome to become an even bigger, better food science ecosystem?
Okay, if I may start, the food ecosystem is growing at a very dynamic pace in Singapore. We are seeing, so many innovative startups coming to Singapore, tapping on our Asian market, right? Talent is something that we need to pay a bit more attention to. The education in STEM and attracting enough STEM graduates to enter into the food sector. So that's one. The food regulatory framework must also keep pace to all the advanced technologies. So while we do have an up-to-date food regulatory framework, it must continue to advance. The consumer engagement must be a continuing process as well.
Ever-evolving standards and methods to engage. Michael, maybe you have your own thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with Hazel. One of the things that Singapore is doing to hit its 30-30 strategy and even 2024 strategy to reduce waste is being able to be more self-sufficient. And how do you do that? We have initiatives in St. John's Island for smart agriculture. We have initiatives for vertical farming. We have initiatives to try and recover secondary byproducts from food processing to make food again. The ability to take these good ideas and bring them through the regulatory framework and work with industries to promote sustainability in a safe, conscious way is something that I think can only be done effectively when you have industry combined with academic institutions and government to have a united message to bring to consumers. So very much in favor of working together to utilize the resources that we have and bring them to the forefront of food science.
Thank you so much both for your points about what we can be doing to become a bigger and better ecosystem. I just want to come back very quickly to the Bright Science Hub. So Michael, you spoke a bit about the capabilities that the hub has. I just want to dig in a little bit more and maybe try and find out more about the reasons for why Singapore was chosen as the site for the hub, and whether you've seen any early results that are encouraging that you might want to share.
Thank you, Benny. DSM is operated in Singapore for about 25 years. The reason for choosing Singapore as the first of the hubs that DSM has created around the world is the fact that Singapore has the most stable economy as central to all of APAC. It's the most, and has been for a long time, the fastest growing region in the world. The infrastructure in Singapore, the assistance and the vision that Singapore government has to be able to help promote itself as an initiative leader, as an innovation leader, as a leader to be able to provide health and well-being for its people. You wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
It's very nice to hear from a Singaporean perspective. So thank you very much for your kind words. I think as we are coming to the end of this discussion, I also wanted to find out more about how some of our viewers and listeners could engage with both of your institutions, particularly in relation to what SIFBI is doing and what DSM is doing through the Bright Science Hub. So if you could share, what kind of entities would fit best with what you are doing and how they could best engage, I think that would be useful for them. Maybe Dr. Hazel, we can start with you.
For SIFBI, we work with a wide range of partners. It could be the academia, whether it's local or international. With enterprises, we work with a wide range from the corporations to startups, and we are also ready to enter into co-venture with another company. So-called simpler way of working with SIFBI. Typically, it could be either in terms of service agreements or longer-term research collaborations. It could take different forms of modality. The simplest would be one-to-one or working with a variety of companies to solve common problems. So we welcome listeners to write in to us, to our email address. And we've got a team of corporate strategy and business development who will be able to share with you what the suite of capabilities we have, and also to understand your challenge statements more and how we can co-innovate together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Michael?
Thank you, Benny. Thank you, Hazel. The DSM, for those that haven't been introduced to the company before, is over 100 years old and has had 3 transitions through its period of where it is now as a global leader in food ingredients. What the Bright Science Hub was designed to do was to provide access to smaller companies to this wealth of industry knowledge. One of the things that DSM has done throughout its entirety is work closely with large organizations around the world. The ability to co-create products on site is what DSM does all over the world. We work with 100 different university groups globally. But the ability to bring local and regional and startup companies on site to have access to those same resources is new for us. So the Bright Science Hub was designed to provide a helping hand to technology here in Singapore, to be able to bring technology to the world. So being able to work with organizations that have a particular focus in food ingredients and encapsulation technology, as Hazel said, in being able to make cookies with phytochemicals that are able to reduce GI effects, to make it healthier for you. They're organizations we're interested to work with. So it's not just about making profit. Good business means sustainability for the long term. So if you work with a company and watch them grow, everyone will benefit. So
thank you so much for sharing that. Sustainability in its many forms, including in terms of long-term profit. It's great to hear about that. Before we end off, both of you have had long and illustrious careers in food science and nutrition. And I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners are on the other end of the spectrum, just starting out, trying to figure their way out. What kind of advice would you give to them as they start on their journeys, Dr. Hazel?
Well, so we earlier spoke about food innovation being multifactorial. The problems that we are trying to solve are also complex and multifactorial. So for new entrants to this industry is to take an open mindset, to be willing to seek out partnerships, to take a multidisciplinary approach. The challenges are immense, but they are also exciting opportunities. So for those people who are really at the final years of the study in STEM, we really encourage you to explore this sector.
Thank you, Dr. Hazel and Michael.
Thank you, Benny. Agree with Hazel again. If I can break my answer down into two parts, for an individual that wants to come into this industry, having been here for 40 years, I find it a fascinating institution to be in. My recommendation is to join a large company or an institution such as A-Star early in your career and get exposure to parameters that will expand your mind. For organizations and startup companies that are just beginning, partner with large organizations, prepare your business plans, prepare your strategic vision, prepare your financial goals, in addition to being able to develop the science. You have to have this merger of the three to mitigate long-term risk. For companies that are starting up, to be able to have good financial plans, good business objectives, good strategy, helps investors to be able to want to be part of you. So being able to put the complete package so it's easy to sell the technology helps bring these innovations to the future.
I like that very much. It's openness to learning and to innovation, not just at a personal level, but also at a company level. Thank you so much for your sharing, not just Michael, but Dr. Hazel as well. And thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Digital Feed. Yeah, I'm sure our listeners and viewers have greatly enjoyed our discussion today. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for joining us on our episode of the Digital Feed today on understanding food science and sustainability. Be sure to check out our social media channels and to join us at our events and to watch out also for the next episode of the Digital Feed. Thank you so much for joining us today.